Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you're a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, or you're a founder, CEO who's looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. This is Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. Katherine Adamek, two-time Olympic medalist and performance mindset coach, and the owner of Fix Your Mindset, is here joining us on the podcast. Katherine, thanks for joining us.
Mike, thanks for having me.
And I say us because usually Jody's here too, but as we're doing some of these the interviews, Jody's no longer in here. He and his team are still taking care of the editing, but I haven't gotten past the us and we type stuff. And I guess it's thanks for joining me and everybody else who's listening out there.
Well, you're making a team, right? All your listeners are on your team and part of your tribe. So it's still, I'd still count that as an us.
So how important is team when it comes to mindset?
You know, it really depends. It depends on what your goal is. And so, from having competed in an individual sport, I really needed my teammates from a training perspective to give me a push. But when it was time to compete, it was really just me. I mean, not that I didn't have support staff that was helping me get where I was going, but it's very lonely when you have to perform by yourself. And I remember often feeling like, if you win, your team wins, but if you lose alone. That was pretty hard to deal with. And so I think if I can look back and self-reflect now, especially, now that I have some experience coaching, I would look back and think, man, I don't want my athletes to feel that way. I want them to feel like either you win alone and you lose alone, or you win as a team and we lose as a team. And so I really think it's a matter of what's your goal. And sometimes you really are looking at that individual one-on-one performance and teaching whoever it is, maybe it's, a friend or a family member or someone you work with. Sometimes people need help understanding what 100% responsible means and how to embrace and embody that. And sometimes you need a tribe. And it really just depends on what your goal is, on what mindset you'll choose in any given situation.
So what are some things that we can think about when it comes to goal setting?
The biggest thing that I like to think about with goals, I've got a couple different processes that I follow. So the first process is pretty obvious, right? You just start with, where do I want to go? What's the objective here? And then what I like to do is to take that and break it down into 2 or 3 smaller parts. And so, for example, if I'm thinking, mindset specific, and maybe I'm working with a client to develop some confidence. Ideally, we have a big board meeting or presentation or something that this is the goal. My client will have this goal of walking into a room with their shoulders back and their head up high and feeling maybe anxious, right? Maybe some butterflies, and yet overwhelmingly competent to handle this. And so we know that's where we're going. But I also know that you have to take these little baby steps to get to that point. You can't just pep talk yourself the day up. And so what a saying I really like is competence builds confidence. And so we want to start working on these really simple skills that you're extremely competent at, even though they may not initially feel incredibly challenging. The idea is to get yourself on a roll, feeling like I can do this, even if you have to start small or start simple. And then let's say if your big speech is in 3 months, well, then maybe 2 months out, I want you getting in front of friends and family and practicing this. And even if you don't feel confident, fake it. Learn what that body language feels like and learn how to lean into that discomfort of what faking it feels like, because no one can tell unless you show them. And you have to practice that body language. That was a big thing as a competitor of almost never did I go into something thinking I was going to win a race, but I certainly wasn't going to let anybody else know that. As far as anyone looking at me was concerned, I had it in the bag. We have to practice that because it's uncomfortable. It feels like imposter syndrome playing out in your own mind, and you have to convince yourself that you're not coming in an arrogant or cocky space, but you're actually coming in just refusing to back down on what you believe you can achieve and what you believe you've worked so hard on. And so all of that is kind of like some mental skill coaching that I might use to help a client get to that point of confidence. But really, as mentioned, I want to break it down into 2 or 3 smaller parts and say, within a month from now, I want you raising your hand and speaking up at meetings, maybe 3 times a week. We need to make it objective, whatever that is for that person. Or I want you to take on the task of making a report that maybe isn't usually your responsibility. But we need to find those baby steps that help you practice, because the process of learning is not comfortable. It's really not, but it's that competence, that ability to know, like, I can learn, I can overcome my mistakes, that builds confidence to the point where on the big day, you show up and you're going to have butterflies, your palms are going to be sweaty, but you know this feeling. You've leaned in, you're comfortable with the discomfort of the process, and then you can really shine.
So why is it that we feel uncomfortable with this stuff? I mean, at some point in time, we've learned something, whether it's learning how to ride a bike, or it's learning how to deliver a presentation, or it's learning how to drive a car, or learning how to cook. I mean, we go through these learning experiences, and we know that we're not as good when we start as we are when we finish, or as we get further along down the continuum. Why do we all struggle with this?
I think everybody struggles in a slightly different way. And some of the things that I've seen, and probably the number one thing that I relate to the most, is there's this little inner wheel of self-judgment going. And so, like, let's say that I'm 30 and I don't know how to cook. It's really not, like, black and white. The tangible skills of cooking aren't that bad. They're really not. But if you spend a half hour of meal prep and all of your self-talk is saying is, I'm such a loser and I suck at this and I don't know how to chop that, and what if it tastes bad, and I should, it's that self-talk. And it's not just negative self-talk, but it's judging yourself. It's saying something to you that you'd never say to a friend, right? Like, if a friend was struggling with this, you'd coach them through it. You'd be there for them. But to ourselves, we're just mean. And I think that that's probably rooted somewhere into just self-preservation, right? Like, if your goal is to feel joyful and confident, it's uncomfortable to be in situations where you feel like a loser. But I mean, I'm sorry to put it so harshly, but that's really what I feel like most people come up against, is this fear that they can't, which is not reality. Being afraid that you can't is not the same thing as I can't. And even if it was the same thing as I can't, I would ask, why? Why can't you? I can't has no solution, but I can't because I don't know how. All right, let's identify the skills you need. Let's break down the action items and let's turn that into a habit. Now you can. And so I really think a lot of it is this kind of fear of failure and what that means to our perception of ourselves, for one, but also this fear of failure and what will other people think, because we can always make that story magnified and much, much worse when we start thinking, oh, and then they won't like me, or then she was always right about me. That self-talk just really gets worse and worse the longer that you engage with it.
Yeah, and you're going through a couple of different things. I mean, one of the patterns that I'm seeing as you're describing this is, one, there's a design approach to all of this, meaning you've got a current state and you've got an end state, and there's a process of kind of figuring out, how do I make those steps to move from the current state to whatever the end state is, or current state to wherever the desired state is. But then there's also this piece around, how do I get myself out of this negative space and treat myself in a way that's similar to how I might treat others? Now, there are some people who are just jerks in general, and they may have a hard time treating people with a high level of dignity and respect. But one of the things I'm hearing as you're describing this is, if you're having a conversation with yourself before you get involved in whether it's an event or it's a meeting or it's an activity, and you're saying something to yourself that you wouldn't say to someone else, you've got to check yourself, and you've got to kind of hit, I don't know, maybe it's hit a reset button.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and the perfect example of this, and one of the reasons why I became so passionate about coaching mental skills, was when I left the sport of speed skating. I guess I didn't leave the sport, but I retired from competition in 2013. But it was because I was injured, and I was it wasn't my choice, which was its own mental battle in the first place. But when I started coaching, I started seeing these girls who so much reminded me of me when I was their age, because as a coach, I'm doing my job to push them. And I don't want you to be able to finish every workout. I don't want you to feel good at the end of your set. I want you to have to battle and really fight through some of the harder moments in training, so you're ready when it's time to race. And these young women would be so upset, and I would see these two themes over and over again. Either they're so upset with themselves that they would get into this state of just really harsh self-judgment to the point of panic, where they're literally crying and hyperventilating a little bit, and just really showing me and trusting me with this idea that their self-worth, their belief in themselves was actually quite low. And I could resonate with that so deeply, because that had been very much my experience as an athlete. But the other side of that was, my dad's going to be so upset, right? Like, didn't get the personal best, or I didn't win the race, or I didn't qualify for the team. My dad's going to be so upset, which again, I can resonate with, and not, the dad part specifically, but like what's someone going to think? What are they going to say? It can get really deep and really hard and emotional especially I was working with teenagers. But as I've grown up and as the age of the athlete that I work with has progressed, I see it everywhere, and in my mindset coaching, even with my corporate clients, I see this intense fear. It's usually some variation of not good enough. And whether that's not good enough for yourself, not good enough for someone else, not good enough to the point where you're worthy of love, there's some underlying current that seems to be consistent throughout every client that I work with. And so much of what I'm doing from a mental skills coaching place, and why I believe that it so strongly impacts performance, is because your lap times, from an athlete perspective, your lap times don't get faster if you feel like crap about yourself. Performance doesn't improve. Your chance of going home and eating good food and going to bed on time and surrounding yourself with the right people does not go up. It goes down when you feel like junk about yourself. And yet we constantly run into this where I think this is just maybe part of the human condition. And so anyway, I saw this happening in my athletes, and it resonated so clearly with me. And to go back to the point that you made too about some people are just jerks, I started questioning, like, where does this self-talk come from? Where do these emotions come out of people? It's coming from your thoughts. It's coming from the way that you think about yourself and the things you believe about the world. And so it's really helped me to develop this sense of compassion. If somebody is just plain being a jerk, I can encourage you to even think of it like, that person's inner dialogue is so toxic, it can't help but spill out their mouth. And when I can think of a person speaking harshly in that way, that it's just a reflection of the way that they think, I can have compassion. Where's that person coming from? Why do they feel like they have to be like this? Do I have to engage here? Do I really have to take that personal? The answer is always no. You never have to take it personal. And you even have the choice. Do you want to separate entirely or show a hand of compassion? Hey man, you don't usually talk to me like that. You must be really upset. What's going on? And I just find that in that process, you make your own mental space a place you really enjoy living in, and have a greater impact on others when you can come from that mindful, caring, intentional place, and you're just planting that seed of like, look man, you can do this too. It's a skill that you practice and develop, and it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but you lean in and then your life gets better.
So let's talk about developing that skill. What are some things that we can do? Let's say I hear the noise and it's bothering me, or it's getting to me. I'm just hearing it in the background. It's like, look, dude, you haven't worked out in a couple of months. You got to get yourself back in the gym. But then all of a sudden, hey, I can watch a little bit of Game of Thrones, or the hockey game's on, or whatever it is. It's easy to just kind of get sucked into that. What are some exercises that we can do individually to help regain focus and help, be aware of that talk and help get ourselves on the right track?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would recommend to always do is to ask yourself, how would you speak to a friend? And so I had when I made my comeback, I could often think back to these young women who had shown me some really insecure parts of them. So when I was feeling really insecure, I could think back and say, what would I say? What would I have said to one of these girls? And when I could see from that outside perspective that they were doing just fine and it was just their head that was getting in their way, then it helped me realize, well, maybe it's just my head getting in my way. And so I really truly believe that step one is compassion and awareness. So realize when you're doing it, and then take a moment to step back. Don't engage in that negative self-talk, and instead ask, if I had a friend who needed me to help, who I cared for, how would I help them through this? And you can use that separation of perspective to give yourself some better advice. And then once you can kind of separate, you can take a broader view on where does your self-talk tend to go? And so negative self-talk, I find, falls into one of 5 buckets. And there's either I suck, poor me, I can't, doubt, like shoulda, coulda, woulda, or the world is full of idiots. And so these are just kind of our default mindsets. People don't generally choose to think that way, but everybody has what's called your default neural network. And it's your brain on autopilot. Everybody's brain, if you were fully and actively engaged in every sensory piece of input in your room right now, just in the room, you'd go nuts, right? So your brain has to have a way to filter that out and say, what's important? What do I actually need to focus on? And that default pattern starts to show up. And if you're in a negative space, it falls into one of those 5 buckets. So what I would question you and your listeners is just to do some self-reflecting and find out, where do I default to? Personally, I default to I suck. And then but I suck has no solution. In the same way that I can't, or poor me, or the world is full of idiots. None of these are problems with solutions, which means that they're not even worth your mental energy. Like, why? There's no other problem in the world that you'd waste your time on if it had no solution.
Yep.
So start asking why. If it's me saying I suck, why? Well, because I can't keep up with the boys. Why? Because boys are faster than me. Why? Because I'm not doing enough to change my style of skating to keep up with competitors that are faster than I am. I'm the common denominator here. No one's doing this to me. I can take responsibility by asking why and finding a problem with a solution and then taking action on that solution. And so, to go back to your example, there's a great show on, or there's playoff hockey on. So instead of like, so I suck, I'm not going to the gym, however your voice in your own head sounds,
yep.
Right? You can ask why. Well, sometimes we don't take enough time for ourselves. And the reason why is as simple as I'm exhausted and I'm worn out and I don't feel prioritized in my life. And all I want to do is watch a show, gosh darn it. Okay, watch your show and don't be so hard on yourself. No big deal.
Yep.
But if the answer why is because I don't want to put on my shoes and get in the car and then I got to drive there and all the things, you can see where I'm going with this. This problem has a solution, and the solution is to get up and go to the gym.
Right.
But it's different, right? You can give yourself that compassion and that benefit of the doubt. There's usually a reason why, but you have to ask the question in order to find the answer.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people who are listening right now and they're thinking, well, this just continues to come up as a pattern, these root cause analysis, where we go through, we start to say, okay, what is the root cause of this? And you can ask those questions, the 5 whys, and work your way through it. I think another thing that jumps out is, there are many times we do this in our business, yet for whatever reason, we don't want to do it for ourselves. And if that's happening in your business or that's happening in the work that you're doing, you may have to push the reset button and ask that question. Why am I doing this in other areas, and how come I haven't applied the same ideas and concepts in my mind?
Sure. So at that point, what I think most people hopefully relate to is just there's this type of fear-based thinking, and it really keeps us stuck. And it's the same idea that being afraid that you can't and then actually not being able to aren't the same thing. And so either it's this, you're super overwhelmed and you're afraid you're going to fail, and it's so overwhelming just to get started that you don't. So then it would default back to the very first thing we talked about. Competence builds confidence. Pick the easiest thing you can do and do it. And then do it 3 times in a row, and then do it 5 times in a row. And you don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. Because what's great about trying is that you either get what you worked for or you get experience. And I used to have a teammate who every time I would lose a race and I'd be in a funk, he would say, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. And that level of learning is impossible to achieve without the willingness to truly and wholeheartedly try. It's going to hurt when you fail, and that's the only way that you're going to have an opportunity to self-reflect and ask why and get better.
Yep. So we've talked a lot about some of the negative self-talk. What about in those situations where things change quickly? And we had to change the other day. We had originally planned on recording. We ran into some timing things that actually ended up working out better for both of us, that we were able to move the recording time. Where does mindset come into play when thinking about change management and being able to deal with change?
Yeah, well, I think it depends, again, like if we're talking about the individual trying to struggle through change versus the leader trying to get other people to buy into change. And I
Okay.
think it really starts coming down to culture. And so what I see a lot is that people want to embrace change, but again, there's that overwhelming like fear of getting started. And then there's this irrational fear of like, what if I fail? So what I think mindset can really do in a positive way. And if you train this, if you practice this on purpose and you kind of think to yourself, what's the kind of life that I want to live, right? Personally, I want to live a life where other people's mistakes don't bother me because I know that when I make mistakes, I crave and really feel that I deserve some compassion. And so when a lot of it's kind of that, looking in the mirror and saying, how can you build and create the life that you want to live today? And if you want to build and create a space where change is safe and failing is to be expected, but also so is like genuine hard work and courage and the ability to put yourself out there, you also can't be the type of person that gets mad when someone else has courage and puts themselves out there and fails. You have to be the kind of person that says, hey, I was going to do that. I would want someone to put their arm around me and help. You have to be that person in order, if you want to build and create that around you, no one else is going to start it first. And I don't care at this point if you are the individual or the manager or leader. It's not, no one else is going to do that for you. And it's scary. It really is. And so in my experience, the best thing to do is to start small, like one person, like one comrade to say, I've been really negative lately. And for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to try to only see the positive in situations. And I just want you to know if I come off like, I'm kind of being kind of a Tommy tryhard right now and I need to cool it. I just need you to know this is why I'm doing it. This is what I'm trying to do. And give yourself that accountability partner and that person who creates space for you to try something new without judgment. Because I think you'll get yourself on a roll where it's one person, two person, three people. And then all of a sudden, just through being the best you possible, your effect has projected onto others to build and create that environment.
So I have to ask you, what's a Tommy tryhard?
Oh, it's a phrase that I really hate, actually, because I am the typical Tommy tryhard. It's someone who's always doing just a little bit too much, right? Like maybe can't rest, can't ever finish a project and think that's good enough. I'm happy with that. I can leave now. It's someone who's always tinkering to the point where everyone else in the room is like, would you give it up? And, I think in the athlete world, some other coaches and I will joke, like, when did being a tryhard become a bad thing? Being a tryhard should actually be one of the most admirable things out there. But as with all things, there's a line. There's a point where if you're trying too hard over and over again, we probably need to talk about, like, why don't you feel like what you're doing is good enough? Because at some point, like, you're kind of reflecting out to the world that you're afraid that it's not good yet, right? Or like you're trying to be this super ultra perfectionist. So a Tommy tryhard is someone who just never stops trying, always wears their hearts on their sleeve, and maybe can't quite feel where that line is between enough and too much.
So let's say, hypothetically speaking, I'm a Tommy tryhard. How do I overcome that? Like, what are some practices I can put in place to realize, hey, you know what? This is good enough, or I need to be able to lay back, or maybe even, let's say I've got a team of people who I'm leading, and because of this tendency to just keep going and going and going, I'm now getting in the way of their potential success. How do I reconcile with this and realize that this might be happening, even if I don't always have a mirror in front of me that I'm looking in every...
Yeah. So I like to think of it, and this is, again, just one of my great passions in life is being able to take my athletic experience and relate it over to what that means kind of in the real world. And so if you're an athlete, there's an entire, college major and master's programs and doctorate programs on exercise physiology, the science of how the body recovers and gets stronger. And there are these very specific work to rest ratios. Like if you're going to work at a maximal effort for 10 seconds, for every 10 seconds of maximal work that you do, you need somewhere between 50 seconds and 5 minutes of rest. That's probably, that's not the exact scientific rest ratio, but it's well accepted in the athletic community that there's a certain amount of rest that helps you achieve the ideal amount of work. We don't use that rule in real life. I didn't realize it until I stopped skating. because rest is such a critical part of performance when you're talking about your body. I personally believe that it's also a critical part of performance when you're talking about your mind. But we do kind of live in this hard society a little bit where you have to keep going. If you're tired, keep working. Grab a coffee, stay up all night, right? And it's very motivating to accomplish things and to be good enough and to show off your skills. But at the same time, if you were to ask your body to work as hard as you were to ask your mind to work, you'd be injured in a month, which I don't know is very far off from what you just explained to me. I really should go to the gym, but I just want to relax. I just want to watch my show. You're working really, really hard. You need that time to relax. So my question then, and my advice to someone who's kind of struggling to find that line would be, what's the work to rest ratio that you perform in the most ideal way under, and how do you build that into your life? Because free time has almost become this thing. If people have free time, I'm sure you've probably heard of the Sunday scaries. Yes?
I haven't.
Okay.
I am learning so much. I'm going to have this great bushel or, toolbox of cool phrases that I'm going to use from now on.
Perfect. So the Sunday scaries are kind of like a millennial's experience every Sunday, where at the end of the week, you're super excited because your work week's almost over. Friday night, Saturday, you're having a great time. You can finally relax and you get a little bit of space to breathe. And then Sunday is that moment where you have enough time to start thinking about the week ahead. And instead of remaining in that present moment of I enjoy this, I can go to the beach, or I can watch a movie, I can be outside, and actually enjoying your rest, your free time, because that's what it is that lets you refuel so you can go hard again the next week. We start thinking, well, tomorrow's going to be this. At the end of the week, I have to do that. And all of these things that aren't even actually happening. They're just the thoughts going on in your brain. You create this anxious, scared state. You're scared for your weekend to be over because you're scared of what Monday is going to hold for you. In my opinion, anxiety is a fear of the future, and the Sunday scaries are actively participating in the fear of your life, of being afraid of what comes next. And so it's very simple, but extremely not easy. Just be present. Really, nothing that's going on inside your head is actually happening right now. So do you have to engage in that path? Do you have to go down that death spiral? Or could you take a deep breath and say, good thing that meeting's tomorrow, right? Yep. I need 15 or 20 minutes to prep my questions, and then I can do that tomorrow. Or it's 24 hours of just constantly recycling all the things you have to do. And so this is why it becomes a habit. It's almost like a loop, like a muscle memory in your brain. You just get on this pattern of overthinking. And in the same way you have to break down a bad habit physically, you have to break down that same habit mentally by recognizing that it's there, adding some awareness so that when you see it, you choose a different path, and then doing that about 1,000 times until the new path becomes.
Yeah. So first question I want to ask is about meditation. Where does meditation play in this, and does it have a role in this? And is it a practice that you'd recommend?
Definitely. I highly recommend meditation. And so the simplest definition of meditation that I can give is practicing of focus. You're just picking one thing at a time. And that might be how your feet feel on the floor. That might be how your breath sounds. That might be the way the sun is shining on your face. Picking one thing and trying to just be fully engaged in that one thing. And because your brain is busy, all brains are busy, you'll get distracted. And so that's why it's a practice. You have to practice coming back to that one thing. And so when we meditate, we're training the mind to stay focused on only one thing at a time. And so mindfulness is that practice of noticing when your thoughts have wandered. So if meditating is practicing the focus, mindfulness is noticing when you've lost your focus and bringing that back. And there are so many ways to do this. There's so many apps out there. There's so many YouTube channels and TED Talks on how to do this. My number one resource for helping people who are new to mindfulness and meditation is a program called Vision Pursue. And so it's the program that I used as an athlete. When I made my comeback for 2018, I had a ton of performance anxiety. I was really afraid I wouldn't make the team, or I didn't know how to fulfill my role. And my sports psych said, I want you to try this 10-week curriculum on an app called Vision Pursue. And I have to tell you, I'd already been meditating and doing yoga for years, but I never understood how to slow down my thoughts as effectively as I did by completing that 10-week process. And so if you're a listener and you're new to it and you want more information, but you need kind of a beginner's guide, I think Vision Pursue is by far the most helpful curriculum that doesn't just apply to where your brain's at right now. It also gives you practices like, now go out in the day and do this with a friend, or notice this while you're walking or while you're driving. And it really helps you bridge outside of just kind of your protected mental space when you're meditating. How do you carry that protected mental space out with you into the world and use it to improve your life experience? That's the goal, right?
Awesome. And we'll include links in the show notes for that. So as we're going through this, there are a couple of things that have come to mind for me, but there are these triggers that happen. Like all of a sudden I'm realizing, hey, there's some negative self-talk that's happening. Or before I hit a golf ball, I look at a spot either on the golf ball or just behind the golf ball, or I say something like in Tin Cup where Kevin Costner's role, he'd say dollar bills or something to that effect. But there are these triggers that happen. One of my personal triggers, when I'm riding my bike down from the gym, see the mountain. The mountain's in the background. The mountain is a personal trigger for gratitude and just a reminder that, hey, there's some really big things in this entire world that are much larger than me. And being able to just focus on one thing becomes important. How do triggers help the athlete? And how do triggers help a high-performing sales professional? And how can triggers help a learning professional that's out there trying to figure out a way to optimize in their role? How do triggers help with optimization?
Yeah, so I love that you're using the word trigger, because I think a trigger can actually be a positive or a negative. And so, if you can be triggered into a thought of gratitude by seeing a mountain, I agree with you. Mountains are like probably my favorite way of decompressing because they make me feel small. They make my problems feel small. So anything that, for your listeners, anything that you can look at and you can realize like you're a part of a bigger picture playing out, that doesn't mean that you ever give less than your best. It just means that the picture is playing out even if you mess up today. And it's going to be okay. The wheel will turn again tomorrow. So having those positive triggers to help keep you in this frame of mind where you give yourself the grace and space to be on a process. Every day is not performance day. I mean, 9 days out of 10 are process-driven days. 99 days out of 100 are process-driven days. So kind of keeping that mindset of when it's time to really be on versus when it's time to let yourself learn and grow. But triggers can also be negative, and you can be negatively triggered into a fearful state of mind. I'm thinking I'm going to get fired today, or maybe fear of underperforming, like you're not 100% ready for this meeting. And I think those negative triggers actually happen to us so many times a day that you can't count. And all of those times are completely out of your control. Those negative triggers are going to come into your mental space, whether you want them to or not. So almost having a layer of positive triggers set up around you of like, let me check in and just take a moment to breathe and look at that mountain. Let me look at these pictures of my kids or watch this video of my niece and nephew. The things that remind you that there's a bigger picture playing out today and that imperfection is an absolutely crucial part of that process. That really helps me to remember that people don't want me to be perfect. They want me to be real. They want me to do the best that I can and to be present with them. And super honestly, I'll share a story from kind of some coaching that I do. There are days that I show up and I probably could have spent more time writing the plan, or I could have been there early getting the room in order. And sometimes I show up and I'm not fully prepared. And one of two things happen. Either my self-talk goes to that negative space, and the entire time I tell myself, man, if you were a better coach, you would have got here early. Or if you were really as organized as you say you are, then you'd have 10 weeks of programming already planned out. But the reality is that not every day is perfect. And the biggest impact I can make for my athletes is to be present for them, to see what they're struggling with and to coach them through that struggle. The best plan in the entire world doesn't apply if you've forgotten to pay attention to who you wrote it for. And I think that can go, are you parents? Are you writing a parenting plan? Are you writing a management plan? Are you writing a personal self-development plan? Remember who's at the core of that. And they don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be there with them and encourage them as part of their process. So that's kind of the big picture view that I would take on triggers and how to, set up a boundary so that you're not having to only deal with negative ones, but you're still creating that positive space for your own healthy triggers.
Well, as you were describing that, you're talking about going into the room, or you're talking about if I was better, I would have done this, or if I was more focused, I would have been able to do this, or I could have done that. All of those things will come into play. And I know I've had those same thoughts walking into a room or walking into a meeting or walking into a wherever. How often does the person on the other end, the coaching client that comes in or the group that you're speaking to, how often do they know what's in your head?
Yeah, literally never.
So how do you reconcile with that? So now you've got all this stuff where you just went through this battle where internally you're like, oh, I'm going nuts. And then the reality is they have no idea.
Yeah, they don't. And that's why I think that second step of being present is crucial, because if you miss that moment where someone is super fired up, super motivated and feeling great, and they can handle a push today, but you're beating yourself up for one of any reasons that you have, you're going to miss that opportunity. And I really, truly believe that each and every one of us has a skill set, has a calling, right? And to varying degrees of confidence and varying degrees of personal development, we are competent in many, many, many skills. We forget because we look at Instagram all the time and we feel like losers because everyone else is prettier and going to cool places and, all those things.
Yep.
But when you step back and remember, like, wow, I offer this unique gift to the world. And I have a message, not because of me, but I have a message because someone else needs to hear it. And you start looking for opportunities to make a positive impact in other people's lives. The best plan in the world can't do that. The most perfectly thought out plan can't be there for a person when they need you. Only you can do that. And so, I can't say enough how, of course, you have to plan. Of course, you have to be prepared. Doing your best every day is the expectation. But some days aren't perfect. And then being the best that you can be from a present-minded standpoint is always going to be better than beating yourself up. You're not going to be as effective. You're creating that negative self-talk and those limiting beliefs for yourself. The longer you engage in that type of thinking, you can cut it out by finding that positive present trigger, something that reminds you that bigger picture's playing out. You're competent, you're capable, just be here now and everything's going to be okay.
Is there a practice that you go through when you think about this is something I can control versus this is something that is just completely out of my control and I just have to let it go? And I know we talked a little bit about that early, but is there a practice or is there some guidance that you can share with the audience about how do you distinguish between the things you can control and the things that you can't control and reconcile with that?
Yeah. So the first thing, and this concept's actually from that Vision Pursue app. And so if you or any of your listeners check it out, you'll get a little chance to review. There's 3 kind of ways to manage any situation. You're either in control, you are not in control, or you can influence but not control the situation.
Yep.
And so when I use the phrase control, what I mean is get something to be exactly the way that you want and keep it there. And so in that instance, what can you think of that is you can get it to be exactly the way you want and keep it there? What you got?
I can pick up this pencil and I can start writing.
You can write down. Perfect. Yeah, it's your action. It's what you are doing right now. And beyond that, there's not very much. Now, we can look at what you can influence, which is, so let's say like my finances. I can't directly control how much money I guess I can through working hard, but at the same time, so let's say that I want to retire one day. Everybody does. I can't control how slowly or quickly the stock market grows and lets me do that, but I can influence it by putting my 10% aside every month. And so even though I can't directly control that situation, I can take steps that count and that influence it to make it better. This is a mindset issue. Because if you start there and then you say, oh, but I don't have my life savings figured out yet, I'm such a loser, no. If you go on that self-talk, you will miss the opportunity to say, you know what, I can't directly control this, but I can influence this by doing just a little bit better, just a smidge. And then there's the things you can't control. And so when you're looking at things like that, I like to use a term called embrace the suck. I went to a Navy SEALs training camp with my team back in 2010. And the very first thing we did, the instructor had us hold a plank position. And he went around with water bottles and was like squirting people. And we'd all whine and complain and drop down to our knees. And he'd get mad and yell at us, get back up, come on, hold your plank. And by the end, after like 5 minutes of holding this plank, he came to his point of, yeah, this is going to suck. You can whine about it. You can complain about it. You can drop your knees and give up. Or you can just embrace the fact that what I'm going to have you do for the next 2 days is going to suck. And the only way to make it better is to fix your mindset about it.
Awesome.
It's super powerful. 99% of things we don't control, we're lucky if we get to influence them. But we spend so much mental time, so much emotional energy replaying those things we can't control over and over again in our head. It's so empowering when you can finally say, you know what, that sucks and there's nothing I can do about it. What can I control? What can I influence? If it's nothing, cool. Give yourself permission to move on. If it's something, even better, take action. Baby steps every day. And it doesn't matter if you can control it or not. You can influence. When I'll go back to that idea of building and creating. You can build and create the life you want by taking small actions towards influence.
So let's talk a little bit about your recovery. So you go through and you get injured, and one of the things you can't control is how quickly your body recovers, right? I mean, you can do all that you want to do around sleep. You can do all that you want to do around rehab, but there are certain things that you just can't control there. One of the things that folks in the sales professional run into, and anything, I mean, you run through these in life, is you go through these slumps, or you go through these ruts where you just kind of feel like, all of these things are out of control. No matter what I'm doing, things just aren't working. My recovery is not moving as fast because mentally I know I want to be out there and I know that I'm ready to go, but I just physically can't do it. Can you share some ideas and thoughts and experience around recovery and that path to recovery, and how you were able to keep yourself focused so that you were able to be successful through that recovery?
Yeah. So I can look back on all of my injuries and honestly say that I'm not proud of the way that I handled myself. But again, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want.
There you go.
And hindsight's always 20/20. But what I've started, the strategy I've started using in the last 6 months or so, is I use this for myself, but I also use this for my clients and asking, how is it that you want? And so, for example, I've got a client who every week, we talk about, I want to feel confident. I want to feel strong. I want to feel independent and athletic and capable and pretty and all of these things. And I'm like, okay, so what things do you do that make you feel that way? And when the answer is like, oh, I feel really competent when I do the right thing at work. I feel really independent when I go do social things by myself and I'm not afraid. And I feel really athletic when I go back horseback riding and I can show all the people in my class all these skills that I've developed. And so that's the moment where I can say to that client, okay, well, you literally just described to me your typical week. So you are living the life experience that you most want to feel. And that, I hope, is an eye-opening statement for some to realize, like, oh, I have some money in the bank. I have nice clothes. I have nice things. I have friends. I like my job. Like, all of a sudden, when you focus on what are the things that I want and what are the actions I take to fulfill those wants and needs, I guarantee you probably do a solid 8 out of 10 of them already. And the areas that maybe aren't fully fulfilled, maybe take some self-discovery. That's half the fun. And so when it comes to this point of recovery and maybe you're not in control of how fast you get back, I can say, pretty confidently that for me, I was so desperate to get back to the top of my sport because I wanted to feel good enough. I wanted to win and I wanted to show the world what I could do. And the only way I thought at the time I could do that was through speed skating. But the way you really do that is like you pick up someone who's down, you take the time. So if I want to feel energetic and motivated, you set goals and you eat right and you sleep enough. And I think that you can take that performance idea and say, well, I'll only feel good enough if I win the race. Or you can say, what actions do I already take daily that make me feel good enough? Getting my workout in, spending quality time with my family, being present and recognizing when someone around me needs help. I am speaking very personally, but I hope that there are listeners saying like, oh yeah, those things fire me up too. So then winning the race is great, but winning the race has nothing to do with you being good enough. You are already cultivating that feeling of good enough every single day. And it's just a matter of your mindset, letting yourself see that and live there instead of falling prey to that idea that you need to go accomplish that goal in order to feel good enough. I guarantee you, you're already doing things that make you feel good enough every day. You can still strive for that goal with all your heart, but you don't need the accomplishment. You're already doing the tasks that it takes to get the feeling that you're going for.
In total, if you think about it, and I know this might be a really tough question, and it might just be a ballpark answer, but when you think of championship races or final races, what's the total amount of time that you think you've competed where you're actually in that event, where the stakes are, I am at my peak performance and I'm winning or I'm losing? What's the total amount of time or even percentage of time versus your entire career where you're in that I'm competing and I'm in the moment mode versus I'm doing all the prep and the things that are getting me ready to do that?
Yeah, well, I can tell you right now, my best distance took 1.5 minutes to race.
Okay.
And I did 8 international and 2 domestic races a year.
Yep.
Hopefully I was making the final in all of those. So in a year of preparation, which is about somewhere between 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week for 10 months a year. What's 1.5 times 10.5 minutes? I was actually, no, that's not right. That'd be 15 minutes. I was actually competing. Like, that's
awesome.
When you zoom out like that, yeah, over all the hundreds and thousands of hours in a year of training and preparation, and 15 minutes was actual all out, hard on the line performance time.
Very cool. Katherine, thanks for sharing that awesome story. It's amazing when you step back out and you say how many different points in time you actually get a chance to perform and how excited you should be about those opportunities that you get to perform. And then how much time is really spent on building up to it, whether it's the recovery aspects or it's the training aspect or it's the preparation. And if you're not enjoying the journey and you're focused too much on the outcomes, check yourself. Be careful because you might get yourself into a situation where you're falling into one of those deep ruts. As we wrap things up and we wind the conversation down, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, there's just one more story that I'd like to share. And really, this is, I feel like I've shared a couple of reasons, but this is really the heart of it, of why I feel so passionate about coaching performance mindset. And it's because at a young age, I was 21 and I had 2 Olympic medals. By 23, I had a world championship and I had so many cool things. Like I was sponsored by Nike and Red Bull. And on paper, there was no reason for me to be upset, but I still struggled with confidence. I still struggled with making connections with people. I struggled with being present. I was constantly judging and hating and worrying about myself in the future or just re-looping situations from the past. And that even though I had all the tangible things, my life experience just didn't feel, quote unquote, good enough. And it was through the process of mindset. It was through the process of changing the way that I think to embrace my challenges as opposed to being afraid of my challenges that actually let me dig deeper and work harder and come farther as a human being. That's not the same as winning in my sport. And, I don't think that we touched on this, but in 2018, I didn't make the team. I missed it by 2 spots, but that's why the culmination of the journey was so powerful, to recognize that you can feel good enough. You can feel confident. You can feel motivated and connected and passionate about the journey that you're on. But the trick is that you won't get it through the things. I had the things, and it doesn't solve the problem. Taking the time to fix your mindset is what puts you in that space that you really, truly want to be in.
Awesome. So for the folks who are listening out there who want to work on fixing their mindset, they want to learn more about what you're working on, they want to keep track of what you're doing, where can they find you?
My website, which is fixyourmindset.com, would be the best place to find me. I'm also pretty easy to get in touch with on email, and it's just Katherine@fixyourmindset.com.
Awesome. And we'll include links in the show notes. So I have walked away with so much to think about as a result of the conversation, whether it's Sunday scaries or Tommy Try Hard or any of the number of things that we ended up getting into. So, Katherine, thank you very much for the time. If you know anyone who would benefit from hearing this discussion, please share it with them and let us know via Twitter or LinkedIn. Thank you for reviewing the podcast. Your ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast. We'll begin reading reviews on a future episode. Also, thank you for listening to the Catalyst Still podcast. Thank you for putting this work to action. Thank you for letting us know how you're putting it into action, and go out there and make things happen. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.